Hello everyone, welcome to the next review, the next Thitherward review, not Oldhamward as the channel of course used to be called. I've been changing the aesthetic of the channel as well, the icon and whatnot, so I really think it better suits the ethos not only of the channel but my fiction and non-fiction as well. So before we get into this review, I really want to flag up that I'm aware that I haven't been doing as many reviews as I perhaps should. That's really a case of course, I think I've mentioned before that I most of the books that I read a fair while ago, so it's always pretty difficult to remember the details of the plot, and even some of the character names fade as well. So it's really a case of sitting down, finding the motivation to, as I say, sit down and remember and recall all the different concepts and the themes and the ideas of a certain work. It's a shame as well because I've reviewed on this channel. I've reviewed books that I didn't enjoy, but I've not reviewed books that I did enjoy. So I kind of need to remedy that, I think. I also feel like I want to review more books just because I have the sense of I like it's almost like a completionist mindset. I think I almost view certain books as standing for the thitherward, previously Oldhamward uh, worldview or mindset. So this is a great example. Although this book I enjoyed reading it at the time, it didn't particularly stand out to me. Um, but I felt like because now I've gone through some worldview changes in relation to spirituality and whatnot, and the sacred. I I just looked at this on my bookshelf and I thought, oh wow, actually this now is more pertinent to me than it perhaps might have been in the past. I'm not sure if you have that similar. I'm not sure if you've had a similar feeling or experience where a certain work, although it can be enjoyable at the time, it doesn't quite resonate with you, and then something will change in your life where you can actually look back in retrospect and think, oh wow, actually this particular work actually does have more meaning now. Um, and that's definitely the case with this book. So I think I'd like to review more books, even if they didn't necessarily leave a very strong impact, just because I would like to promote them in terms of their aesthetics and the concepts involved, and just I guess just the topic, in this case the topic of forest and mythology and folklore, because that's important to Thitherward. It's also kind of it's an easier way to review books because I don't necessarily have to sit down and think of all the pros and cons and really get to grips with the work. And indeed, for this, I think I'm actually going to review this almost in real time. I've not really had a look at this since last year, I think it was, or I think it was last year. So I think I'll just review this in real time and see how it goes because I remember quite enjoying parts of this book. With that said, let's get into the review for The Forest and Folklore Mythology by Alexander Proteus. Assembled from an enormous range of sources, this fascinating book is a mind-expanding compendium of facts, folklore, superstitions, myths and anecdotes about trees in the forest. Included are descriptions of old forests, forest customs, temples and sacred groves, and mythical forest creatures such as witches, fairies, demons, wood spirits, the wild huntsman, and wood nymphs. There's a lot in here. There really is a lot in here. I remember looking at reviews for this book before I got it, and this book was written in the 1920s, 1928, I think. The author seems to be rather unknown, Alexander Proteus. I remember trying to find more information on him because, especially after reading the book, because there's a lot in here. This is a huge compendium of almost very disparate facts. It's a huge it feels like a huge undertaking. It's surprising just how international and widespread these facts are. We cover the forests of Borneo, Germany. I'm looking at the words Singalese, the New World, Australia, Chaldean accounts of Genesis. I mean, Merlin, Sir Tristram, we'll get into the contents of the book, but Greece, obviously, there's definitely a lot in here. I'm not sure if viewers of Thitherward have experienced this, or they just generally have this as a kind of an aesthetic response in life. But I really love the aesthetic of words to do with nature, especially antique words, archaic words. And for example, in chapter 1, Forests of Eld, just the way that looks, I respond to it in a way that's kind of hard to describe. I love the word eld, not too dissimilar, of course, to Elden word. So in that chapter, we cover things like the archaean forests, primeval and tropical forests, cosmogonic and traditional forests. Chapter 2, we cover the forests of romance and myth. There's an entire section dedicated to forestry, for example, the Ban forests or the royal forests. Early forestry, the moon's influence, ancient foresters, forest customs. Entire section just on groves. Entire section, or chapter rather, just on the mythical denizens of the forest and woods. Again, that's witches, fairies, demons, wood spirits, etc. Trees of all sorts, burial trees, the genealogical tree, the life tree, guardian trees, transformations into trees, mythical trees, curious trees. Entire chapter devoted to folklore, of course, Yule logs, divining rods, wands, the bark of trees, and then forest trees and legends at the very end there. So I'm going to read just a couple of paragraphs here, just to give you an idea of just how broad-ranging this work is. There's sort of a negative attached to this, but overall I think it's indicative of just how dense this is. It's not actually a very long book, but it's extremely dense. In Asia, vast forests yet exist in many unexplored quarters in much the same condition as they did in primeval ages, and in their depths, myth and superstition still hold full sway. According to Pliny, they were forests beyond the shores of the Red Sea, in which the city of Ptolemais was situated near Lake Moneleus, which city had been built by Philadelphus for the pursuit of the elephant, and that in consequence it had been called Epitharus. When Timur the Tartar subdued the kingdom of Kashgar, he marched to a distance of about 1,440 miles toward the northeast of Samarkand, etc., etc. Going down, we have Palestine is one of those ancient seats of civilization which in former times contained numerous forests, but which now, owing to the ravages of war and the improvidence of the people, except in a few districts, is a comparatively bare and treeless land. The structure of this book is such that even in a given section, you will tend to jump around a lot. For example, I remember there's a part near the end where, so here's a great example. We're talking about the legend of Izdabur, I believe, which is part of Chaldean mythology. The very next paragraph, just in a sentence or two, is about Alexander the Great, and during his wanderings, for example, he encountered some flower maidens. The very next sentence is about Dante describing the Cimmerian forest. The very next paragraph after that is about Orpheus and Eurydice. So it's there's a negative in the sense that it perhaps doesn't really synthesize. It doesn't really. We're not really given any deeper meaning, but it's more of a sort of taxonomic account. I think that's probably the best way to describe it. Just found a reference to the Mabinogion, the Lady of the Fountain, Welsh romance, Sir Tristram. That's one of the things I love about reading. I read this work several months before reading the Mabinogion, so I'm sure if I went back to this, I would definitely make a lot more sense. Of course, more connections would have been made there. The forest of Broceliande. I recognise Broceliande from Mythical Wood. The forest of Huon, King Charlemagne, Oberon. Of course, we have the Grail legend, Sherwood Forest in Nottingham. The tale of Perrault's tale of the Sleeping Beauty of the Wood, or in the Wood rather. Yeah, I remember that from my delvings into fairy tales, George MacDonald and the like. If it's not obvious by now, if you're a fan of forests and you're a fan of mythology, I highly recommend this work. So this is one of the things I was trying to find. In chapter 4 on groves, this has stuck with me since reading it. It's an excerpt from a poem by Waller. This is a phenomenal excerpt of a poem here. In such green palaces the first kings reigned, slept in their shades and angels entertained. With such old counsellors they did advise, and by frequenting sacred groves grew wise. Free from the impediments of light and noise, man thus retired, his noblest thoughts employs. Goosebumps reading that, in fact. The city of Vienna arose round a sacred grove, the last remaining tree of which, a venerable oak, the Stock am Eisen, stands in the centre of the city. Very next paragraph rather. In Lithuania, holy groves were often maintained near the villages, and it was considered a deadly sin to break off a branch therein, and that he who did so would either die suddenly or be crippled for life. W. Manhart speaks of an old sacred grove consisting of fir trees near Dorpa in Russia. The Moslem heaven, and of course it's a little bit of an older text, Muslim heaven, among other delights comprised numerous groves, and a tale is told of an Arabian youth who, embracing his relatives on leaving for the field of battle, exclaimed, "Farewell, we shall meet again among the groves and fountains which God has provided for his elect." Goes on to talk about India. At points it seems actually veritably obscure. In Assam, each Mundari village has its sacred grove, and the gods of the grove are held responsible for the crops and are especially honoured at all the great agricultural festivals. Mr. W. W. Skeet mentions a grove of durian trees near Jugra and Selangor in the Malay Peninsula. Confucius completed his commentaries on the ancient books of China in the solitude of a grove of apricot trees. It really is. I'm on page 56. Rather impressive. So the great thing about this book is that it's got a plethora of literary allusions, but also it covers, in the very beginning, particularly in the Forest of El chapter, it covers a fair bit of science as well. Of course, the main mode of discussion is to do with, of course, folklore mythology. A spectral huntsman, very similar to the wild huntsman of Germany and other countries, ranges the Malay forests. In some parts of Borneo, these spirits are looked upon as the souls of the dead. In Nigeria, a human victim, usually a leper, was always offered to Obumo, the god of thunder. The victim was first wrapped in palm leaves and was then tied to the top of a high tree. When a Maori of New Zealand desired a tree for the purpose of making a canoe, he would select this tree and cut a strip of bark from off of it. The tree then became taboo and no one would so much as touch it. The origin of mankind from plants seems to be a myth of ancient Aryan origin, and Hesiod, when treating of the ages of the world, speaks of 5 succeeding races of mankind, and he tells that the third, or brazen race of men, were formed by Zeus out of ash trees. The Volsunga saga is an early Teutonic epic, which relates how, on one occasion, Odin, in the guise of a stranger, thrust the great sword Gram into the trunk of the oak branstock. I think you get the idea. I highly recommend this book if you're interested in, well, as the title says, the forest and folklore mythology. Thanks for watching, everyone. This has been the first Thitherward review. Till next time.